I had a fleeting moment with Dan Clark's Corina, a new high-end electrostatic release from the company, when I attended Can Jam this year in New York City. It was pretty impressive, and I've since been patiently waiting to get my hands on it for a longer due diligence listen. I was pleased with the Dan Clark Stealth, their flagship closed-back planar headphone, and frankly blown away by its open-back counterpart, the Expanse. While those headphones were essentially the premium editions of the more affordable Aeon series from Dan Clark, the Corina, priced at a frankly whopping $4,500, is a step up from the already premium-priced Dan Clark Voce, which goes for $2,600 and was the company's previous electrostatic flagship. While I'll be focusing mostly on just the Corina for this video, I'll make some notes comparing it to the Audeze CRBN, as it is an identically priced high-end electrostatic headphone, and might just give you a sense of some of the variation you can find in this pocket of the market. So let's get into it, starting with what comes with the Corina. You get your Dan Clark Audio Corina electrostatic headphones, unsurprisingly, a semi-detachable 2-meter electrostatic headphone cable, a headphone stand, and you also get the certificate of authentication and I believe a warranty with it as well. Quick note, you can use code Chris10 at Audio46 to get 10% off a wide array of brands and items, and you'll also help support the channel, so win-win. There are some brands and items that this code may not be applicable to, but if you're having issues with the code, you can just shoot Audio46 customer support an email and see if they can help you out. They'll get back to you quickly. I'm also including a link to purchase the Corina, Expanse, and Stealth from Audio46 down below. If you purchase any of those specifically by clicking that link, you will help support the channel, and I would be very, very grateful. But anyway, let's start with what's familiar from Dan Clark's other high-end flagships with the Corina. So the Corina's frame is held together by malleable titanium alloy bands and features a self-adjusting leather suspension headband with black and blue stitching that spells Corina on top. The lightly padded underside of the headband is also stitched with a geometric cube pattern. As I'm familiar with the Stealth and Expanse, I wasn't surprised to find that the Corina fit on my head as if it was custom made for it. Dan Clark really has the comfort of their flagship lines down pat, everything from the pad density to the extra fine-tuned calibration and resistance in these suspension headbands. So while the Dan Clark Corina is a little heavy at 465 grams, though not very heavy in comparison to other headphones in its tier, the headband goes a long way in tricking you into thinking it's a lot lighter than it really is. Also worth noting is the exceptional flexibility afforded in the titanium alloy frame of the headband, which you can see here. But different from the Stealth and Expanse is the flexibility of the Corina's cans. While the former two had cans that can ergonomically fold into the headband, the Corina's cans can only move as much as a single hinge on their horizontal axis allows them to. Makes enough sense to me, as it takes a special breed of audiophile to treat a pair of high-end electrostatics as a pair to take on the go. This line of thought is similarly reflected in Dan Clark's decision to include a headphone stand rather than a travel case with the Corina. Now, for the earpads, we see a hybrid material design with synthetic suede composing the surface that makes contact with the listener's face, with what appears to be partially fenestrated sheepskin or synthetic leather for the interior material. It was hard to find exactly what this interior material is, just taking an educated guess here. A detail for the nerds like myself to get excited over is that every unit of the Corina has matched ear pads to further enhance left-right channel matching. While I found the pads to squish firmly against my head and offer a high degree of comfort in tandem with the Corina's light but secure clamp pressure, my small criticism here is the moderate heat buildup, which I experienced even in the midst of the open back design. I wasn't sweating from it, and it would probably take someone who is particularly sensitive to this quality for it to be a deal-breaking complaint. And as for the cable, it is thick, not very heavy, seemingly durable, and features nylon insulation on its outermost layer. It avoids being overly stiff without being flimsy and reminds me of a pro-quality cable you might see in a studio. While technically detachable, it screws into place, so future owners seem encouraged to only swap cables when completely necessary. And then finally, we see a new open back grille design from Dan Clark on the Corina's metal cans. Again, not unlike the company's other flagships, there's a somewhat alien, otherworldly aesthetic that the Corina has going for it. All in all, it has a boutique and well-crafted style to it that is befitting for what may likely be a future owner's crown jewel in their collection. Now, for technical design and specs, let's first address what's arguably the most important technical feature, the inclusion of AMTS, that is, Acoustic Metamaterial Tuning System. Originally making its debut in the Stealth and the Expanse, the Corina is Dan Clark's first electrostatic headphone to include this component. The AMTS device is situated between the headphone driver and the listener's ear and consists of a series of diffusers and resonators. As a sound diffuser, it virtually eliminates standing waves, which commonly occur in the higher frequencies of headphones. Resonators serve to further, quote-unquote, smooth and shape mid-range and high frequencies, and contribute to the Corina's tone and tuning. So there's a new voicing to the Corina. The Corina is building off of the concept that went into the Voce, basically reducing the high frequency emphasis commonly heard in electrostatic headphones in pursuit of a richer and more pleasing sort of tone. The company boasts of further improvements in the Corina that resulted in a stronger low end and, again, quote unquote, smoother mid-range. The 88mm electrostatic drivers see upgrades from the Voce when it comes to diaphragm tension and uniformity. Like I mentioned about the ear pads in the last section, left and right drivers come as a matched pair to maximize channel balance. Again, pretty cool. Last thing I'll note here is that the drivers are significantly tilted, which you can see here. Also, when you look up its frequency response, Dan Clark puts it simply in a kind of snarky way as, yes, flat to 6 Hz with new voicing. But before we get into the balance, let me just give you some details on the practical usage of the Corina. So the Corina is a pretty hungry headphone that takes a lot of power to drive. I'm pairing it with a Stax SMR D50 amp/DAC for this review, and it's connected via USB to my laptop. And I'm feeding my MacBook into the amp as loudly as I can before it starts to clip. And I'm able to get the Corina just loud enough for me to be okay with using this amp for this review. So really doubly true for the Corina than it is for other high-end headphones. Make sure you have a killer amp to drive it. I say this for more than just its power requirements. Listening with the Stax D50 seems to be quite a different experience from when I was listening to it with the Blue Hawaii tube amp at the Dan Clark Audio CanJam table. At that time, I heard a distinct warmth and heft from the Corina that is significantly less present when listening with the solid-state SMR D50. In short, you're going to need a lot of power, and the Corina seems pretty sensitive to its sources. But finally, getting into what the Corina sounds like, starting with soundstage and imaging. So the first quality that leapt out to me when listening to the Corina this time around was the absurd distance it can push past its cans. It's the kind of holographic character that regularly had me taking the headphones off to check where some background noise was coming from, only to realize that I was hearing the background of a track that I was listening to, as if it was across the room and behind me. For a specific example of where this really literally happened to me, you can check out the track All Our Bass Are Belong to Them by The Books. There's something more analytical about its 3D character than what's heard on the frankly enormous stage of Dan Clark's Expanse. The Expanse's stage is what I might consider artful in its spatial character, a quality that expresses itself with reverbs and parts of the like washing across its perceived stereo image. The Corina rivals the Expanse's stage size, but has a more firm character that can be heard on even the driest of tracks. I suppose what I'm saying in part is that there's a more accurate and analytical character present here that positions parts with a firm and jarringly exact placement. A sensation that kept returning to me throughout my listens was feeling parts as if they originated from a sizable distance behind me. In fact, I can't recall the last over-ear I listened to that was this keen on the sort of behind-the-head trickery. In short, the Corina stage is as enormous as you might expect from the company that made the Expanse and possesses a 360-degree character that doesn't take much imagination to experience. Rather, it seems like a central tenet to the Corina's imaging. But now, moving on to general notes on the balance and some other impressions that I had on the Corina. So, as I mentioned earlier, I listened to the Corina through a Blue Hawaii tube amp previous to this review, which may likely account for why I heard a warm, sort of low-mid character to the headphone during my CanJam listen. Pairing it with what is likely a more transparent, solid-state amp like the Stax D50 had me understanding why Dan Clark is calling the Corina a reference headphone. Because this thing is flat, like through and through neutral. You know, go ahead, look for its biases or coloration, but going solely by ear and not testing equipment, I'm not sure you're gonna really be able to find it. Until maybe you get to mid or upper treble, which I'll touch on shortly. So the biggest beneficiary of this borderline, just totalitarian neutrality was vocals, which presented with an intimately lifelike balance in their fundamentals, overtone, and fry. I found a similar sort of character in acoustic guitars and drums, really any and all mid-range centric parts. Just speculation, but I think this hyper-realism in the balance, working together with the matched pairings of the drivers and the pads, may be going a long way in producing the Corina's thoroughly 3D and really convincingly accurate stage. Or if these things aren't a direct cause, they certainly work together and enhance it. Perhaps the only deviation from the Corina's thoroughly flat sound can be heard in the mid and upper treble, which are lightly but noticeably attenuated. This didn't come across as really darkening the balance, but rather smoothed it over. There's still plenty of high frequency resolve that pushes pleasantly against the Corina's firm low end and mid range, but its less forward character has it entirely avoiding risks of peakiness. Now, I know easy listening balance may commonly be a kind of euphemistic phrase to see in a review, but I use it genuinely to describe what the Corina is doing with its mid and upper treble levels. It is basically a highly inoffensive tuning that still maintains a very high level of detail. Maybe the only part of the balance that I wanted a little more from was sub bass. While present and detailed, and I'm assuming at a fairly equal amplitude to most of the rest of the balance, I struggled to get like an exciting rumble from the Corina, even on my heaviest sub bass test tracks, like for example, Sindones by Juana Molina. In general, the Corina doesn't offer the most tactile listens that really, rumble and slam. Sub and mid bass are maybe heard a little more than they're felt, but I'm speaking from a place of pure listening pleasure. When the Corina is viewed in the context of being a reference headphone, this low end is perfectly adequate in power and exceptionally detailed in its exhibition of timbres. So how does the Corina compare to another headphone that is basically to a T in its class, the Audeze CRBN, another electrostatic headphone that goes for $4,500? Well, we can start with what they have in common. So similar enough power requirements, with the CRBN maybe just using a hair more power than the Corina. Also, like the Corina, the CRBN is exceptionally flat and balanced until it hits its treble. But now, unlike the Corina, there is a big, bold spike in the CRBN's mid-treble. This brings a distinct intensity to harmonics, reverbs, and cymbals that isn't really there on the Corina. In fact, this is the exact area that the Corina seems to be intentionally smoothing over and attenuating a bit. While the bass and mids balances are strikingly similar between the two headphones, it's the treble region that makes the Corina a more relaxed headphone and the CRBN a pretty intense headphone. Now, when it comes to soundstage, the two offer similarly impressive but fairly different experiences. Like I already described earlier, the Corina soundstage has parts floating in and out from a seemingly endless perimeter. In comparison to the CRBN, it kind of lacks a shape, as if it's borderless. The CRBN puts you in more of a distinct and defined headspace, granted still a pretty large one. And then finally, one of the biggest differences to go over is actually the fit. The Corina is firm, but unlikely to elicit complaints from most listeners. But I would call it straight up relaxed when we're talking about it relative to the CRBN, which really grips your head and even the upper portion of your neck. Interestingly enough, the differences in fit are similar to what can be said about their differences in sound. The Audeze CRBN is intense and driving, while the Corina is more relaxed and easygoing. But now, overall impressions on the Corina. So, while Dan Clark's other flagships outright excited me, I'm left with a kind of different feeling about the Corina, but I'm no less impressed by it. If I wanted to be maybe reductionist and even a bit pretentious about it, I would simply call its overall sound proper. There are some high-end headphones that can entertain newbies and seasoned audiophiles alike, and I would say that the Expanse and the Stealth do that. And others possess more subtle premium qualities that are best appreciated by maybe the more experienced audiophiles who know what to listen for. And I would say that that is more of the sort of headphone that the Corina is. Although I do think that its massive and jarringly accurate soundstage may be one feature that could impress seasoned audiophiles and newbies alike. So it offers a level of realism that honestly very few headphones can compete with, and it does it in a very classy and most importantly comfortable package. I think it is perfectly worthy of joining the high ranks of the Expanse and the Stealth, and offers a one-of-a-kind, truly relaxed but detailed sound for an electrostatic headphone. If you want to get 10% off a wide array of brands and items at Audio 46, you can use the promo code Chris10 at checkout, and you'll also help support the channel that way, so win-win. There are brands and items where that promo code may not be applicable, but if you're having issues with the code, you can shoot Audio 46 customer support an email and see if they can help you out. I'm also including a link to purchase the Corina, Expanse, and the Stealth from Audio 46 below, and if you purchase any of those using those links specifically, you will help support the channel, and I would be eternally grateful. Anyway, this is Chris with Major Hi-Fi, and I'll see you guys next time.